The dust may only just have settled on this year's Tour de France, but due to the fact that the revised calendar is attempting to cram every big race into a period of about 3 months, it means that the next big race is almost already upon us.
And when we say big, we mean big. It's the UCI Road Cycling World Championships. So coming up is everything you need to know about the routes, the races, and the riders taking part.
We're going to start though with the venue. And now this year's World Championships were actually due to take place quite close to the UCI headquarters in Aigle-Martigny in Switzerland. However, due to Swiss restrictions on COVID-19 stuff and public gatherings, etc., they decided to cancel that event.
Yeah, which meant that the UCI had to quickly scramble around to find an alternative venue. Brittany in France was muted, as was the Netherlands, and then potentially maybe even combining it with the Bastogne-Liège. But in the end, it's Imola in Italy that's taken up the mantle.
And I think we all let out a little bit of a gasp when we heard it was going to be on a motor racing circuit, didn't we? Because, well, in my experience at least, motor racing circuits produce some fantastically exciting motor races and far less exciting bicycle races. However, our fears were soon allayed once they revealed the actual routes for the races.
We gasped, but then breathed a sigh of relief as it became apparent that the races weren't confined to just the famous motor racing circuit, but would head out into the surrounding roads. And that means that this year's World Champs are a serious test of climbing.
And that's actually almost an understatement when you look at the stats already, isn't it? So the men's race, for example, just under 260 kilometres in length. They've got 5,000 metres of climbing to deal with over that distance, whilst the women's is 143 kilometres, but they've got 2,800 metres of elevation gain. Both those races will take place around the same circuit, and in fact, it's the first time since Ponferrada in Spain back in 2014 where the Elite World Championships have both taken place entirely around one single lap.
Yeah. Now, the start and finish is on the famous motor racing circuit, but from there they will head south to Begulo, and then soon after the climbing starts in a place called Mazzolana, and the first climb is 2.8 kilometres, an average gradient of 5.9%. But this is quite deceptive because the first kilometre of this climb is absolutely savage. It averages around 10% with a maximum of 13%.
And after they hit the peak of that one, they will turn right and head westwards and get to a place called Isola. And soon after Isola, they will tackle the second and final climb of each and every lap. That one is called the Cima Gallisterna. An even more brutal, steepest gradient actually of 14%. And again, slightly deceptive when you look at the overall stats, they being 2.6 kilometres in length, 6.4% average gradient, because there's a horrific middle section on this occasion. 1.3 kilometres of that middle section average double figures, 10.9%.
It looks absolutely brutal. I mean, from there, it's a 12-kilometre steady descent back to Imola, but it's a big old lap. You know, it's like 29 kilometres. Yeah, and the men are going to take that on 9 times and the women 5 times. And it's going to be that classic war of attrition. You know, with those bergs in it, we're going to see, you know, grinding down gradually of the riders, and to the point where, you know, some are really worn down more than others. And I think it's going to be a fantastic race.
It will be great. I can't wait. But before the road races, of course, we do have the time trials, which are held on a far less brutal course. You're not going to believe this, though. We've got parity between the men's and the women's time trials. Both take place on what is essentially an out and back route from Imola back to Imola, 31.7 kilometres distance for both of them. So we'll get some comparisons there as well. Now with the time trials, there's not pan flat the course, is it? But you also could not describe it as hilly. So we think it's going to suit the beastly time trial specialists. Now, before we go through the main favourites for each of the events, a quick heads up that we do have live coverage of those events on GCN's Race Pass. There are quite a lot of territory restrictions on this particular race though, so please make sure you check whether it's available where you are. In all Race Pass territories though, we will have a breakaway show coming for you on Sunday evening where we'll be analysing all of the races from the previous 4 days. Right, moving on. Now, although it's good news that Imola stepped in to save the World Championship so we can actually watch some this year, the bad news is that it's only hosting championships for elite pro riders, and that means no under-23s and no junior races on this occasion.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a huge disappointment for them. The calendars, the racing calendars for those categories have been drastically hit and massively reduced this year because of COVID, a lot more so than the pro ranks.
Yeah, massively, especially for anyone that's in the last year of their respective category, be that junior or under 23. It's an opportunity lost, really, isn't it?
Yeah, they've had very little opportunity to show themselves.
No, exactly. The good news, though, back to some good news now, is the fact that the UCI have slightly bent their rules or changed them completely in order to allow under 23 riders who aren't currently in a professional team to compete in the elite ranks if they are good enough. You'd imagine that'll only be for the slightly smaller nations, because I can't imagine an under 23 rider from the Netherlands, for example, getting a chance in the elite team. But still, some slightly good news there.
Yeah, speaking of which, I think we need to talk about who is going to be competing. And looking at the start list for the men first, it's mouth-watering. And there's also a really interesting thing happening that we've never had before, which is we've got riders coming into the World Champs who are a week after the Tour de France, going to be going head-to-head against riders who are a week before the Giro d'Italia, who are riders that are targeting the Giro as their main season goal this year. And I can't wait to see.
Well, yeah, like you said, that's never happened, and it's going to be very. Do you reckon it's going to suit the Tour riders more? Yeah, you do.
Totally.
Okay, I'll go Giro then. Now, we should have a caveat in just here, for our own sakes actually, because we are recording this before the Tour de France is even finished. So not only do we not know what happened at the end of that race, we're also not entirely clear on the start list for every nation at the World Championship. So it will involve quite a lot of speculation on our part, which is not our strong point really, is it? So just bear with us. But I think probably best to start with the host nation and the men's race.
Yeah, well, Italy, historically been very strong at the World Championships. But arguably that dominance has waned in recent years. I mean, you'd expect that going into the race, Vincenzo Nibali will be the team leader. Never won a World Championships, but does have two monuments to his name, Milan-San Remo and Il Lombardia. So he does have pedigree. He's proven in one-day races in this kind of terrain. Yeah,
they've not won it for 12 years, have they? Trentin came close last year, and he'll be key backup, you'd imagine, for Nibali. He doesn't look that good at the moment, though, does he, since the season resumed? I mean, 6th in Il Lombardia, 7th in Emilia, consistent, solid. But then by his standards, a rather woeful 19th overall at Tirreno Adriatico, which I expected a lot more from him then, given that he's now fairly close to the Giro, his main goal.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but when the shark attacks, he strikes.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to ignore it and say you're wrong.
Nibali is a rider who has historically come into form at the right time for his targets. We've seen him do that, and he's also backed up by a very strong team. You'd expect, the likes of Ulissi, Trentin, Formolo, maybe Daniel Oss as well. It's very strong. But what about another strong team, the Belgians?
Well, Belgium would have a strong team if it was just Wout Van Aert on his own, wouldn't they?
I mean, he is like three men in one, isn't he?
He is, and as we've seen this year, he can do everything very, very well, can't he? We saw that at the Tour de France. I mean, it's hard on this circuit to imagine him being dropped by anybody on any of the climbs, and it's also hard to see him being out-sprinted by anybody when it comes to the finish, really, isn't it? So understandably, he will start this race as the bookie's favourite.
Yeah, and he'll have, I think, really strong backing as well. I mean, if you imagine that he's got the likes of Van Avermaet, Philippe Gilbert, Tim Wellens in the team as well. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
They will be.
That's pretty ridiculous. But another force to be reckoned with would be Mathieu van der Poel as well. But unfortunately, he's not going to be there, as he said he wants to focus on Paris-Roubaix and the Tour of Flanders.
I know. I was very disappointed and surprised to read that, because I felt like the circuit was reasonably good for him as well.
Do you think it's just because he thinks he can't beat Van Aert?
Well, if that was the case, nobody else would start the race, would they?
By that long.
One other person who will be hoping to beat Van Aert, as I say, is Julian Alaphilippe of France. Now, of course, he didn't have quite the Tour de France this year that he did last year, but he did still take a stage win. And I think he'll be licking his lips at the type of climbs that they'll be tackling in the Imola circuit. Then another main favourite is going to be Mike Rusty Woods of Canada.
Yeah, I don't think many people would be disappointed to see him win. He'll be loving the steep gradients, and while he won't have a strong team in the form of Canada to back him up, he can piggyback off other teams, and that's something we've seen him do in the past. Spain as well, always a very, very strong nation. They will be relying more, I think, on experience going into this one. You've got the likes of Valverde, who could potentially become the oldest ever.
I was going to say, he's got a lot of experience, hasn't he?
Yeah, world champion. If he becomes a world champion, at 40 years old. Also, Luis Leon Sanchez, is an ever-present threat.
When you start reading all the names off, you realise just how many big names there are competing this year. It's great. Beyond those riders, you've also got Jakob Fuglsang. He'll lead Denmark, you'd have thought. Great pedigree in one-day races, particularly over the last couple of years. Max Schachmann. I'd imagine he'll probably lead the German team. You've got that new super talent, is Mark Hirschi, riding for Switzerland. And then you've got Slovenia, or Fast-Vinia, as some people seem to be coining them these days. Primož Roglic and Tadej Pogacar.
Yes, we can't be 100% certain, as this could be the biggest kiss of death GCN's ever done. But we reckon that we could potentially have the Slovenian winner of the Tour de France and the first ever Slovenian world champion as well. But we're not 100% sure if they're both racing at this point in the World Champs, but assuming they are.
And then beyond those guys, you've also got, Kwiatkowski from Poland, another former world champion. Rui Costa of Portugal, another former world champion. Richard Carapaz, even, of Ecuador.
Both, looking like he's coming into good form as well right now.
And we've got all the way through this, and we've not even mentioned Peter Sagan, a 3-time world champion, of course. Now, he didn't look at his best at the Tour de France, didn't win the green jersey. That's pure speculation, but didn't look good for it at this point anyway. But you can never count him out, even on a course that is quite savage this year.
Yeah. Also, from Great Britain, we've got my personal favourite, Tom Pidcock, riding for Yorkshire and Great Britain. But he's one of the under-23 riders that we spoke about earlier that's been allowed to ride in the elite race. I don't think he'll win it as his first one, but you can't rule him out, and I think you could be getting a big performance from him. He's a big talent.
Yeah, I reckon Pidcock will actually probably lead the British team at that race, despite the dispensation to move up a category. And that's partly because there are no Yates twins there, which I was surprised about. Clearly their decision, but that course looks like it suits them down to the ground to me. Beyond the Brits, Australia, you would imagine, will be led by Michael Matthews. And then we haven't even mentioned the Colombians yet, have we? Uran, Higuita, if he's recovered, Lopez. They've got some choices.
Yeah, I think any of them can win, can't they, really? I think we've done a good job there, Dan, of pretty much naming every single person we can think of.
Unlike last year, where we failed to name Mads Pedersen. And actually, we should say that Pedersen is not going to defend his crown in Imola, having decided that the circuit is too tough for him, which is a shame. It's been a shame for him this year not to see more of the rainbow stripes.
Yeah, it is a shame. Especially seeing as he was riding towards the end of the Tour, he looked great. Right, I think we should do the same with the women.
Cover our backs and name everybody. Yeah.
Possible person who can win that race. Starting, there would have been one obvious name and nation that would be almost a surefire nailed-on win, which would have been Annemiek van Vleuten. But unfortunately, she suffered a crash last week in the Giro Rosa and has fractured her wrist and therefore won't be competing. Yeah,
and another rider who was involved in the same crash was Marianne Vos, who to that point had won 3 stages of the race. Now, she only took a lot of skin off compared to Van Vleuten, who, as Ollie said, broke her wrist. So we're not sure yet whether she'll be on the start line, but if she is, and not too badly hurt, she'll start as favourite, surely. Does put a little bit more pressure, though, on the shoulders of Anna van der Breggen. She is a previous world champion, but the Dutch are just so supremely strong that despite the lack of Van Vleuten, they'll still start as the main favourites. The other rider involved in that crash, though, was Amanda Spratt, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Amanda Spratt, fortunately, doesn't seem to have any broken bones from the crash, but as a result of that crash, did withdraw from the Giro Rosa, and so, you know, her preparation for the race is also in doubt. She would have led the Australian team.
Yeah, she's medalled for the last 2 seasons. 3rd in Harrogate last year, 2nd the year before in Austria. Great shame for them. I must admit, though, that what I'd really quite like to see is an outsider win the race, or at least an outside nation. Maybe like Denmark with Cecilie Uttrup Ludwig. I mean, that would be some post-race interview, wouldn't it, if she became the world champion? And she's got a decent chance, you've got to say, as does Ashley Moorman-Pasio of South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, she was flying in the enforced season layoff, but unfortunately, you know, crashed on her first race back at Strade Bianche. But has looked decent at the Giro Rosa. In the first 3 stages, she took 3 top 10s. It was looking good. I mean, also looking good at the Giro Rosa was Kasia Niewiadoma, who
Poland,
went into the race lead after Van Vleuten crashed out.
Yeah, and who knows what happened between there and the finish line on the last day. It's 2020 after all, anything could have happened in the final 2 days of the race. Meanwhile, Italy, we think, will be riding for Elisa Longo Borghini. I mean, she came fantastically close to winning the European Championships, only to be foiled by Van Vleuten in the final sprint, but on great form too. Whilst the aims of Great Britain will be to get a 2nd Rainbows jersey onto the shoulders of Lizzie Deignan.
Yes, and she will most likely be supported by, well, Lizzie Banks, who's been in stellar form as well, won a stage of the Giro Rosa. And, you know, this is nothing to do with patriotism. You know, that Lizzie is obviously competing for the independent state of Yorkshire. But I would love her to see, you know, I'd love to see her get a 2nd world title, because I think she's a fantastic role model and, a very inspirational rider in that she's someone who took time out of her career, has had a child, and then just through sheer grit and determination has worked her way back to the top and is winning the world's best bike races.
She is, yeah. And like you say, it would be inspirational to everybody, wouldn't it, the world over, if she managed to take a 2nd rainbow bands. My favourite, though, and I'm probably revealing my prediction a little bit early here, is Mavi Garcia of Spain. She's been brilliant this year. In fact, she came very close to a major upset at the Strade Bianche at the start of August on the first there. Van Vleuten got the better of her in the end, but it was some performance. She then went on to win the National Road and Time Trial Championships in Spain, so she clearly has all the qualities you need to win on this course.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why you've not heard of her before, it's because she, well, fairly recently came from duathlon and moved into cycling. Clearly, very talented. But the USA will have a strong team as well. You know, you've got the likes of Chloe Dygert, Ruth Winder and Corinne Rivera leading the team for USA, backed up by Taylor Wiles.
Solid team, isn't it? Although Chloe, I noticed on Pro Cycling Stats, has hardly had any UCI racing so far this year. Although with that level of talent, again, you wouldn't put anything past her, would you?
Yeah, no, not at all. And if you were wanting a sort of, an outside bet to, an outsider, an underdog to perhaps cheer on, then Michaela Harvey, 22 years old from New Zealand, right? She's only had 1 pro win, but she was looking pretty good at the Giro Rosa.
She was, yeah, very consistent. Yeah, she took a stage win at the Britannia race last year, I believe. But yeah, she is an outsider to cheer on, so we'll be doing that. That race takes place on Saturday, but we're now going to move on to a race that takes place on Friday, that being the men's time trial. And you would imagine that there, just like Sunday, Wout Van Aert is probably going to start as the main favourite, isn't he? I mean, like I said, we've learnt this year that he can do everything really bloody well, and that includes time trials. You know, he won the National Belgian Championships for the 2nd year in succession ahead of world hour record holder Victor Campenaerts. He also won the Criterium du Dauphiné time trial last year too. So, well, if he did the double of winning both the time trial and the World's Road Race this year, he would be the only person ever to do that. I mean, the time trial world champs only started in '94, but since then, the only rider who has won both in their career is Abraham Milano, but they were 3 years apart. No one's ever won both of them the same year.
It would be incredible, and I think it's a good opportunity to have a poll in the app that you can vote on. So we want to know what you think. Do you think that Van Aert will win both and do the double, the time trial and the road race? Or do you think, no, it can't be done and he won't do it? Or do you think he'll just win one, either the road race or the time trial, but not the other?
You can take the poll by following the link that should be on your screen right now. Now, Van Aert's biggest competition should come from Rowan Dennis, you'd have thought, being current world champion as we record this and all that. Although he didn't have it all his own way, Rowan Dennis, did he, at the final time trial of Tirreno Adriatico?
In fact, I'd say he got absolutely whooped by his teammate, Filippo Ganna, who I have to say is one of the finest specimens of a human I've seen in a long time, Dan.
Well, he's quite powerful. In fact, didn't you see what his power was from that Tirreno stage somehow?
I did, yeah. So, one of the Team Ineos staff members who was in a car following Ganna during the time trial had a Garmin linked up to his power meter, and it auto-uploaded the ride to Strava
and
afterwards. Over 500 watts for 10 minutes in a TT position.
Yeah, I mean, he's a big guy, but that's still bonkers, really, isn't it?
That is mad numbers.
So he will start also as one of the main favourites. Geraint Thomas, he pulled out a decent time trial at Tirreno Adriatico as well, and we're representing Great Britain along with Alex Dowsett. Now, Geraint I can't see either of them actually winning the race this year. I think there are better time trial specialists right now, but both of them could push for a medal, you'd have thought, by the end of it. But I think it's going to go to one of the time trial specialists, and one of those will be Stefan Kung of Switzerland. Now, he became European champion just a few weeks ago, so seems on great form. And he also pulled out of the Tour de France early for the sole reason that he wanted to concentrate his powers on the time trial on Friday. So we'll see how that pans out.
We haven't even mentioned previous world champion Tom Dumoulin or Primoz Roglic.
No, true as well.
Anyway, in the women's,
either of them could win it, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could.
Good job you mentioned them.
Yeah, but in the women's event, the clear favourite has to be Chloe Dygert. She's not had a huge amount of racing this year, but her performance in Harrogate last year was so dominant that you have to put her as favourite. I can't think of a display of I can't think of a performance that was as dominant.
It was incredible. The time gap, wasn't it? And it would have been great to see her pitted up against Van Vleuten again this time, wouldn't it, to see what the difference would have been. But unfortunately, as you said, Van Vleuten is out. The Dutch, though, as ever, will still have a very strong team for the time trial. First up, Anna van der Breggen. Now, she's finished runner-up 4 times in the elite women's time trial, so she's got the pedigree there. Whether or not she can get to the top step remains to be seen. But also Ellen van Dijk, who I know is very disappointed not to be selected by the Dutch selectors for the time trial. But however, we're assuming she'll now be called up, given Van Vleuten's absence.
Yeah, and beyond the Dutch and the Americans, you've also got Lisa Brenner, previous world champion in 2014. And I say beyond the Americans, but you've also got Amber Neighbour, who was world champion at the age of 43 in 2018. Could she double up? I mean, obviously she's 45 now.
Well, that would be quite the story, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be good.
Yeah, a 45-year-old winning an elite world championship, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you think that, because I guess it means there's hope for you, yeah.
Yes, Daniel Lloyd wins 2025 Elite Men's World Time Trial Championships. You heard it here first. Right, we're really blabbering on now. I think we've covered our backs on most of the events taking part or place this year. Just to remind you when they are, the women's time trial is on Thursday, the men's on Friday, women's road race Saturday, and the men's on Sunday. But before we get to any of them, I guess, Ollie, we had better cast our predictions. We'll keep it simple, road races only.
All right.
We expect who's gonna win World Championships road race is, for the men's, Wout Van Aert, and for the women's, Longo Borghini.
So my favorites for this year World Championship are, for the woman first, Niewiadoma Katarzyna, because I think she's the greatest climber at the moment, and I hope she will manage to beat the huge, as usual, Dutch team.
My prediction for the win in the women's race is gonna be Anna van der Breggen, and in the men's race is gonna be Egan Bernal.
I think that Pogacar will win the World Championship in Imola because he has an incredible shape and he's living a dream. For elite women race, I want to say Elisa Longo Borghini. At least I hope so.
My pronostic for the World Championship is Wout Van Aert for the men, the Belgian guys, and for the women, Audrey Cordon-Rago, the French girl.
I think Anna van der Breggen will win again and be world champion. For the men, it's a bit more difficult because not everybody raced at the Tour. For me, Diego Ulissi looked very, very strong at the Tour of Luxembourg, and I think the profile suits him. So I say he will become world champion.
Van Aert. Sorry, I've taken that one.
Can we not have the same one?
No.
All right, I'll have a different one.
And Lizzie Dignan for Yorkshire.
Putting your neck on the line with those two, aren't you? Right, well, in that case, I will go sort of partly with head, but mainly with heart, and say Julian Alaphilippe in the men's race.
Right.
I think he really deserves it after what he's been through so far this year, his dad passing away, etc. And would be the first French winner for 23 years since Laurent Brochard, the original flying mullet.
I'm just... I'm playing it safe after my prediction of Pinot for the Tour. I'm just
I went for Pogacar, didn't I? That was
you
looking
did.
pretty good for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he might even have won it by the time that this comes out. Yeah. Anyway, on the women's side of things, as I mentioned before, I'm going for Mavi Garcia of Spain to cause what would also be a little bit of an upset. So those are our predictions. Leave yours in the comments section down below. Tell us if you think we're wrong and in what you're looking forward to in particular over the 4 days of the World Championships. We hope you've enjoyed the preview. If you have, click on the thumbs up button just down below and we'll see you again soon.